Hello! Today we're going to automate Message 91 sign-up data using viaSocket automations, and connect Message 91 sign-up form with SendGrid, Google Sheets, and Slack API. Also, we are going to write low-code if conditions in script. Let's get started. First, we will connect Message 91 form with viaSocket webhook to get all data on viaSocket. Then we will send all sign-up data on Google Sheet. And then we will create a if condition, and if condition is true, then we will send data on SendGrid and Slack API. Also, we will write a JavaScript code to manipulate the data. Here is the Message 91 sign-up page, which we are going to automate. First, open the viaSocket sign-up link and create an account on viaSocket. You can use Google Login. That's the easiest option to create an account on viaSocket. Once an account is created on viaSocket, it will ask to provide an organization name, and then it will ask to create a project name so that that project can be shared with different people with different permissions. Now, once we entered the project, it's asking to create a data source to receive the data on the viaSocket. We are using viaSocket webhook URL as a data source endpoint to receive data. We've entered the name of data source and created webhook URL that will be by default copied after creating it. Or you can click on the data source name to copy the webhook URL. Webhook URL is simple get URL, which we will be using to get data from Message 91 signup page by integrating it in the HTML code of the Message 91 signup form. We've already integrated the viaSocket webhook URL on Message 91 signup page to receive the data. Now we need to connect the data source endpoint with Workflow. Workflow allows to enable of third-party APIs or apps and write code. To create a workflow, we need to go to the Workflow tab and create it by mentioning the workflow name. And once it is created, it will enable the option to see all the data we are receiving from the Message 91 signup page through viaSocket webhook URL. We need to connect that workflow with the data source we have already created. All data which is coming from Message 91 signup page will be received on viaSocket data source endpoint webhook URL, and from there it will be forwarded to Workflow, which we have created. Now let's do the sign up on Message 91 and send some data on viaSocket. After submitting sign up form, we will get all the data on viaSocket connected workflow. Here is the raw data we have received from Message 91 in query parameter format. It can be in JSON or any other format. We need to pick the parameters by clicking on the checkbox. This data we will be using further. We can rename the parameters. I am picking all the data to use further in different apps. Once we've picked the data, that data will be working as variables, and that variables we are going to use in different APIs, apps, and script. Now we are going to send data to Google Sheet API. To connect apps or API, we need to click on Add Step button. And there we can see different steps like import function, script, loop buttons. To connect API, we will use import function option. There we need to create new function and mention the Google Sheet API details. I've already mentioned API details in the blog that's available in description of the video to make this video shorter. To make API parameters dynamic, we need to use $ just before parameter and it will be dynamic. To authorized Google Sheet, there is option in the authorization to select Google and then select service name of Google we are using. Currently, we are using Google Sheet API authorizations. Now we need to update variable mappings in Google Sheet API. To use variables, we first need to mention $ and it will auto-suggest the variable name which we are receiving from Message 91. To test the API, there is option to dry run the API. We did dry run and sent the data in Google Sheet. Whatever response we've received from Google API, we can pick that as a variable and use that further in the script or apps. Now let's connect one more step to add a script in the workflow. I am using JavaScript, but we can also use Python or Ruby on Rails to write code and manipulate the data. I've already written a JavaScript code. This code will manipulate email ID to get domain name from it. This code will pick the email ID we are receiving from message 91 signup data, and it will return the domain name in a variable. To test the code, we've to use dry run button. Once we receive the response of the code, we will pick that response as domain name variable and use this variable in Slack API and other apps. Now we are going to add one more step in the flow, where we will add if condition. In the if condition, we are using variable we have received from message 91 signup form, that is industry type. If the value of industry type equal to something, let's keep it e-commerce as value. Then only it should be true and pass the condition, otherwise it should false. Now we are going to add one more step, that's Slack API from viaSocket Marketplace to send notification whenever a new signup is happening through message 91 signup form. viaSocket also allow to drag and drop plugs to create more flexible workflow. To customize the Slack notification message, we are going to use variable that we are generating from JavaScript. To use variable, we need to mention $, and it will auto-suggest variable name. Here we have used $domain_name. So every time it will send notification, it will send the domain name in the notification message. We are also using other variables to customize notification message. All these variables we are either getting from APIs, script, or receiving from message 91 signup. Once we are done with data mapping, we have to update it, and we can dry run to test if API is working properly. Now let's connect one more and final step of the flow, that is SendGrid API. SendGrid is mail services which we will be using to send emails to new signup. You can get API from SendGrid API document or from viaSocket Marketplace. I've already copy and paste the API and kept all the API parameters dynamic to map the data. For authentication of SendGrid, we can use username, password, or bearer token in the header. Once the API is created, we will be using this API in the flow by mapping the data and then save it. To map the data in SendGrid plug, we need to again follow the same process. We can keep values static by mentioning values directly, or we can use variables we are receiving or generating from API or scripts. To use variables, we just need to use $operator to get suggestion of available parameters. We need to save the plug once data mapping is done. Now we are dragging the plug and dropping it inside the if condition. Here is our complete workflow is ready to use. And this flow will auto-run whenever viaSocket will receive the data from message 91 signup form. Similar to APIs, if condition and scripts, we can use low-code loop option in viaSocket to iterate the data. You just need to mention variable name you want to iterate. Help document to use the loop is given so that you can use loop inside the viaSocket easily. Finally, we recommend to use viaSocket on every data points you have on your website or internal code so that you can boost productivity of development team by 300% and reduce deployment and agile process time from days to seconds. viaSocket allow you to write low code if condition, loops. And 3 different languages, JavaScript, Python and ROR is supported. viaSocket is the only tool available in the market that allow you to write almost half of your back-end scripts. If you are an outsourcing company, Integrate viaSocket in your client's project and make small changes within seconds whenever client want. And if you are a product company, use viaSocket at every data point so that you and your team don't waste time for small changes. Try it.